Welcome to Draw Along Volume 5. In this video, we're going to be working on the very first page in the Draw Along Volume 5 book. So let's turn to the first page. This book also includes a page that talks about the light source, which we've done in different draw along lessons. We're going to be working on this page here, which is shading with charcoal. But before we begin with this, let's turn back to our page labeled warm-up sketching exercise. And let's just take a charcoal pencil. I'm actually going to be using a Derwent tinted charcoal pencil. This is actually called Lavender. And we just want to practice shading from one end to the other. So let's take a look at just a box. I'm just going to draw a square. And the reference photo today is all about shading from one area to the other. So for today's warm-up sketching exercise, let's just draw a line totally across from one corner to the other. And on this side of it, we're going to shade with a medium pressure. And then as we move up to this imaginary line here, I've drawn it here so that we could see it, but we don't want to see that line in our final piece. We're just going to shade all the way up to this line. So we've got the bottom corner of the square shaded. Now, as we move up to this portion of it, to this upper portion, we want to lighten up on our pressure, but we want to make sure that the transition between all of the different gradations of charcoal as we're moving along onto this shape, we don't want to see the transition. We want to have a seamless transition. We do not want to have something that has defined like this. This is no. And then have this part be, we don't want to see this line right here. So we want this line here to be invisible. Of course, as usual, my dog friends Scarlet and Paisley are here with us because it wouldn't be a draw along without Scarlet and Paisley. So I just want to make sure that everyone realizes that the dog friends are with us. So just like when we're live, I have to make sure they have the last biscuit. So I'm going to be using Derwent tinted charcoal today. So let's get started on the page for today. So I have this set of Derwent tinted charcoal, and I'm going to be using this color, which is called Peat. This set is really cool, actually, because it has different colors in it. It was a 6-pack. There's lavender, there's burnt orange, neutral. This one's called Ocean Deep, and this one's called Forest Pine. But for today's lesson, I'll be working with just peat, and I'll also be using a kneaded eraser. So let's turn to this page here. We're going to open this up, and let's take a look at the photograph that we're working from today, which is all of these octagon, I guess it's octagon, right? Octagon shapes. So we're just going to dive right in. We have, I'm just going to use kind of a border. I'm just going to kind of sketch it out a little bit. And the first thing I want to do is lightly sketch out the shapes before we get involved in shading them. But what I also want to point out in these is that here's the shape. Let's take a look at this one here. We've got this shape here around it, right? So trace your pencil around it so you can kind of get familiar with that. But then as we move in, you can see that there's almost a line that's coming up here because the center of it is raised. So there's kind of a line here again in the middle of it. And all of those are like that. And when we take a look at this, what we're going to do is darken this kind of edge of it. So this is more of a two-dimensional object, but it does have some sides. So we could be able to, this is not completely flat. So let's first I'm just going to take a look at this one right here. So I'm just going to draw this one out. So here is our top portion. We've got the bottom, I'm sorry, the sides. Then we have the bottom that comes down, okay? Now, in the middle, I'm going to also kind of sketch out those lines that we're seeing, kind of those imaginary lines. The one that's next to it is similar, so it's kind of, they're not completely straight. That's the other thing, is that keep in mind that these are not completely straight. I guess these are like patio bricks, or I'm not really sure what they are, but they look like they're kind of patio bricks. This one also kind of goes off to the edge. So there's I'm kind of eyeballing it here for this line here. And now don't forget, we've got our kneaded eraser, so we can definitely erase whatever we need to erase. This guy right here kind of fits in between what is happening and kind of lands on the side here and here. So this guy kind of sits here. Here he is. Here's our like crack in the middle. And again, here's another one that comes off to the side. But we've got this one also. So you can also see here that this comes up. And this comes like this. So we've got these, not really a square that's being made, but it's definitely a shape that's being made that is similar to a square, and if like we were drawing a cube. So now we've got this guy right here. We're on our third row. We're on our third row here. And then we've got this one that kind of goes a little bit closer to this one. So we're going to come up here and come down. And this one comes down. Here's another one here. Here's another one that kind of tucks in. These are off to the side here, right? For these. And then this one up in the corner is just kind of a darker area, but we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to kind of make that like the rest. Okay, so I've got kind of I noticed I've kind of like gone back on my side part of it. But you see how this one is kind of above it right here, and this is closer to this. So now let's talk about what's happening here. We've got this kind of coming up, this going in, and we've got this kind of forming a raised section, right? So, and we've got it right here also. So we've got this raised section here. And then here also. And the bottom ones, you don't really see that as much. But we can kind of still give the illusion or the impression that that is what is actually there. Again, this one here kind of comes up, and there it is right there. Kind of comes closer to that side. Again, here we go. And then this one here, we're going to do the same thing. So we've got kind of our basic structure, skeleton of the drawing, as you will. and just so we can see where all of these are kind of falling in. Now this one here, you can't really see it as much, but we know it's there. So we've got all of these lines here, and now we are going to create shadows and shading so that this middle section becomes the lightest. So I'm going to actually get started on this one. So let's see what happens here. So we've got a darker section here, and all I'm doing is adding a darker area to this middle section, and here's where we get involved with that seamless transition. So if this is all one color here up in this corner, this portion here becomes darker, and then we've got this seamless transition happening, and what we can do is add the charcoal kind of overlapping there. And again, we've got this kind of seamless transition here because we don't really want to see what is happening with this line here. So we're just going to continue on with this one with very light shading for the center. Now, if you look at this in the middle here, there's kind of like an imaginary line, right? So we want to kind of have that be a little bit darker here up in this corner. And then this portion becomes lighter. And again here. Now, what's really going to make these pop is when we get involved in creating this dark line here on the in-betweens. So I want to move this line up a little bit because this is really close to this. So that becomes that in-between line. And here again, and this one is practically white, you know, so we want to just make sure that we don't really get much darker than what's there. And we can also go back in with our kneaded eraser and just kind of take away a little bit that's there and a little bit here. So what we're really focusing on is that shading between each of the items and how that shading kind of blends into itself. And by that, I mean creating that transition, creating that seamless transition. There's a little bit of a dark section right in here. And you can also kind of put your charcoal pencil, if you're using a charcoal pencil, some people might be using just kind of a softer charcoal, like a vine charcoal. You really don't want to hold your charcoal pencil like an actual pencil. You want to hold it more kind of like in your hand. Here it is, pick it up. Little bit of a darker section there. And then see that line right there? You can barely see it, but it's enough. So now we've got this one all set up here. We've got this one. And now let's move on. See how we have that line there that just really truly making it pop. So now let's see what happens when we work on this one. We've got kind of a darker area here. It's kind of the cement, I guess. And then a dark area here, And then there's a shadow kind of here. So this bottom portion is much darker than this topper. The bottom and the topper. The bottom portion and the top. Kind of want a dark line there. We want to see this close to this. So we don't want this line right here to be too thick. Let's just kind of erase what's there. And then we've kind of got a little bit of a dark area here. And again here. But see how this portion is lighter and this portion is even lighter up here. So we basically want these objects, this gradation, to form the actual shape. We've got a little bit of a transition from here to here. We've got a dark area here in the in-between. And this is kind of forming kind of a little bit of a V in a way, right? Over in this area. And this one kind of comes down a little bit closer. So let's see what happens in this corner here, because we've got this coming up. And then this is kind of cutting to make like a little bit of a circle, I guess. Here's that line there so that we can kind of determine, okay, well, what is happening here? And then a lighter area right there. I'm going to just kind of give it an edge at that point, and an edge down here also. Up here, just to kind of frame it in. Just going to give this a little bit of a quick sharpen. Hang on one second. And I'm sharpening these pencils right in my my electric pencil sharpener. So it's working out pretty good. Now we've got this one right here. Here's kind of a darker area. This is much darker than the rest of them here. But we're basically just kind of laying the groundwork. So I want to get rid of this. Keep this its own pressure right there. Here's the crack, which is a little bit darker, coming in there. And we've got kind of a medium crack here as far as color shading is concerned, and we're kind of getting a little bit lighter here. And I'm actually going to take my kneaded eraser and just kind of dab it a little bit so that it just kind of looks like it's a little bit lighter. And then for this one here, here's our line here, coming down, coming up. And, you know, sometimes we talk about those unfinished lines. And where does this come out? This comes out here, right? So we've got to get rid of this line here. Sometimes we talk about an unfinished line gives it a little more of a boost, or a little more of a pop. And then pulling up with this charcoal all the way up to the top. But identifying this crack that's here. Again, we're going to just kind of give this kind of like a dark corner, I guess. We'll move on to this one right here. So as you can see, we're working on kind of a cube, right? You can kind of see how this becomes the top portion of the object and of the sides. Put a little bit of a darker section right there. So here we have a darker area here. We've got this heavier pressure on this in-between section. And then this section here is much lighter than the sides, but we also have a darker area over in the bottom portion of it. So we've got this coming down here. We don't want to have just lines there. We want to have that it looking like it is just simply a shadow that is creating the sides. We don't really see the side here. This is kind of the same. I want to take a little bit off, a little bit away here. And I'm going to do a darker section there. Matter of fact, this whole upper corner is going to be dark when we're done. And then this guy kind of hugs back over here, right? And then this one's much darker. I don't know if we really see the top here, but I'm going to pretend that we do. And then again, of course, this is going to have a darker area, but look how this kind of comes down into its own shape right here. So there's that negative space right there. So we're going to kind of put this here. And then we've got this negative space coming down. It's straight here, right? But when it gets to this point here, it definitely kind of takes a turn rather than a right angle. And it becomes much tighter down here. So there's that kind of like the pathway of that negative space, if you will. And again, here we've got this bottom portion here. I'm going to erase this because we've got this part here, and I want to make sure that that is close to this. And I also want to make sure that this part is close to it. So I want to really kind of make sure we have kind of our pathway and where we are moving on to. I'm going to kind of dab this a little bit right here so it has more of a transition. All right, now let's get started on this guy right here. So we have this part here. If you notice, it's not very straight right there, right? It's kind of a little bit of a crookedness. Comes down with that shadow. Don't forget, that's the in-between there. And then here is the shadow here. And then here again, this portion here is much darker than what is here. So I'm just going to kind of do this to this part here. And then lighten up in the center. Here's kind of a darker area here. Give it a little bit of a dab. Even if you want to make sure that the lines that are next to each other that are more of a seamless transition, you can also kind of dab it with your kneaded eraser. And now as we move down to this one, kind of has a little bit of a a bigger space there. Kind of a little bit of a dark area here, and then this portion here kind of has a line that comes up, but if you notice, it kind of goes off to the side, almost like as a curve. And then we've got a darker section over in this bottom corner. This one is darker on that portion. Again, on this portion here, but it starts to get dark from this side and then gets light. And then on this side of the line, it gets a little bit darker. And of course, this is much darker here. And this is almost like a kind of a crooked situation going on there. And this one is just doing its own thing, flat in a way, right? So we've got that flat area. I'll kind of dab it a little bit to pull out some highlights. So this portion here isn't really straight, but see how we've got this unfinished line like I talked about earlier? And then on the other side of that line. So a lot of times you can create a line that, let me go back to this section here and show you what I'm talking about. You can create a line, and rather than having it be looking like this, you can actually create this same line by having shading here at the top, shading at the bottom, shading at the top. So what ends up happening is that you have a transition of that dark and that light. And what you end up seeing is right in here. You see that, that line with your eye, but you've made kind of an invisible broken line. So we've got a darker line section here. We've got nothing in the middle. And then here we're adding another section of line. Hope that makes sense. I mean, comment below if you feel like you need more clarification on that. And we'll talk about that in a future video also. So, and here's some kind of little dots that are in this, kind of representing maybe even just the cement. We've got a section here that is very, very light in this corner here. So I want to just kind of get rid of this. And we've got this portion here that just kind of comes around like that. We've got our dark lines in the middle. And then we've got this guy up here, which we talked about. All right, so let's make this dark here for this section here to mimic this darkness that's coming down. And then we've got just a medium pressure, I guess, as compared to this, right? And then we've got a kind of a highlight, so let's just take it away. Now, you could, at this point, you could also go back in and really soften your lines by shading with either a paper towel, a tissue, your fingers, a blending stump, whatever you wanted to use. But at this point, I'm going to just leave it the way it is, because what I really want to focus on in this drawing is just kind of touching up the lights and the dark. So I've got this bottom portion here that I feel like needs a little bit more help. And that completes shading with charcoal for first lesson of Draw Along 5.